Welcome back, everybody. I'm having such an exciting day and so many amazing conversations with people. I can't quite believe we've got to panel 3, but we have. So I'd just like to hand you over to Anna Clark, who's going to chair panel 3.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the final panel of the day. I'm going to ask you all to dig really deep on the energy levels and help us to focus on holistic support following child sexual and/or domestic abuse. What does this look like and why is it so important? Just to introduce myself, my name is Anna Clark. I've worked specifically in the domestic and sexual abuse sector for the last 18 years or so. For a number of those, I led a local organisation called Equation. I currently work as an independent consultant, so I work with survivor consultations and survivor advisory panels to gather survivor voice and hopefully raise it up to that strategic level across the city and to hopefully influence service delivery and what we have for survivors across the city. I'm really pleased to welcome our panellists today, and we'll start with a round of introductions. Chris, are you okay?
Hi everyone, I'm a victim and survivor of all forms of childhood abuse, and I grew up in 3 domestic violence households, so I've had lifelong impact of abuse that I've had to deal with. I've worked at the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse for 7 years, and I am the founder and CEO of Survivors of Abuse, Holistic Health Recovery down in Kent and South East London.
Thank you. Esme?
Hello, I'm Esme and I'm part of the participation group at Imara.
Amanda?
Hi, I'm Amanda and I'm a therapist at Imara.
Hello, I'm Nadia. Does this work? Yes. I'm Nadia Heim. I'm an associate professor at Nottingham Trent University in personality psychology and psychopathology. And I've been working with domestic violence and abuse organizations and doing some research in the past, and I'll be able to talk a little bit about that today. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm John. I'm a senior lecturer over at Nottingham Trent, and my work engages with cultural and indigenous responses to various forms of gendered violence. So looking at the way that indigenous cultures kind of have historically responded to it, and thinking about ways that we can integrate more kind of cultural competency into the westernized and colonial responses that we see kind of across the globe.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, that's very close. My name's Lou Graham. I'm the Sexual Violence and Violence Against Women and Girls Lead at the Nottingham Community Safety Partnership, and I also manage the Nottingham Consent Coalition.
Louise has very kindly stepped in for Sharon, so just switch those names out in your booklets. Thank you all. We're very, very lucky to have you with us. So we're going to begin. I'm going to come to Esme first, and I'm going to ask you, how would you define holistic support?
I think holistic support is acknowledging it's the broadest picture for individuals and the implications it has on that young person, and definitely following that individual's lead to where to prioritise the crucial support that they need, as they have got the best knowledge of what they need and what support they want from others as well, whether that's from family, friends, peers, schools, the police or therapy services as well.
Okay, so it's very much considering all aspects of what survivor needs and taking their lead.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant, thank you. Amanda?
I think as a therapist, I try to see myself as part of a team working around the child or young person, and to recognise that everyone around them has something to offer, and also that they believe that they can support them with their experiences of abuse and their trauma recovery. And it's important as a professional to be open to learning from the child or young person that you're working with, their family, as they are the experts on their own experiences. And that really, I guess as a therapist in Imara, like we need to draw on others' expertise as well. So it might be that you see a young person that has a particular way of responding to their trauma. So that might be self-harm, it might be sleep difficulties, They may be neurodiverse, so we have to think about that too. So it's just really, using expertise that's around you to be able to think about what I'm doing in my sessions with the young person.
Okay, thank you. Chris, what's holistic support for you?
So holistic health support means to me the connection between the mind and body, and you can't treat one without the other. If you've ever read the book, But the Body Keeps a Score by Professor van der Kolk, that clearly explains the connection between mind and body. And it's just unfortunate that NHS only does the medical model. They don't look at the whole person. And if you are mentally distressed, physical symptoms will turn up in your body. And equally, if you've got physical symptoms, you become mentally distressed. You can't cut one away from the other. You can't treat one without the other. So that means, for me, that we need to support the whole person.
Thank you. Louise, do you want to come in?
I think every young person's journey is different. It's not a linear experience, and that holistic support may come at a variety of different times and places. That could be a disclosure, that could be to a parent, a family, a school person, and I think it's about having that support tailored to individual needs of those young people and families, and that journey could change. It could change from the start, during getting therapy, whether it's through the criminal justice process, whether it's through your having is virtues for support. I think that for that young person, it needs to be adapted and flexible along that journey, because their needs are always at the centre and the focus of everything that we do.
Okay, thank you. Nadia, come to you.
Really agree with some of the points, especially the mind-body connection. It's really important. But also for us, or for me, when I look at holistic support, it's not just looking at the aftercare. It's about early prevention or early recognition and safeguarding, and assuming that everyone is at risk. So having a model that kind of is looking forward rather than just backward at what happened. I think that would be really important in terms of training, for example. So some of the work I've done was with teachers, and I'll talk about that later on, looking at their confidence in recognizing signs of abuse and doing something about it, for example. So how does training help people feel more confident to step in and prevent, or in terms of early recognition? That's it.
Well, I suppose, is it on? No? Yes. So I suppose kind of for me, it really ties into the principle of bringing together more than just kind of emotional support and criminal justice actors, and looking kind of further and broader into what's needed by the wider culture of the victim. So what other avenues and resources are there within the community that can be built upon to sustain their kind of, their resilience within that space. And so it's talking to kind of, who is the leader in the community. It's talking to kind of the importance of fundamental family actors and things such as that to rally around the survivor and make sure that they are feeling kind of, encompassed in many ways. And it's also about then starting to rethink about how we do policing kind of various forms of sexual violence, recognizing that unfortunately other cultures might have kind of playful touching and things like that, which is not the case. And so how do we then integrate these educational programs into kind of our awareness programs to make sure that everybody is aware of the support that they can have, but also what is appropriate within various contexts.
Okay, thank you. So I guess if we're working to support each individual's needs that you spoke about, including the mind and the body, in what we're doing at all points across the survivor's journey, including those much wider support systems that might be going on, cultural contexts and early intervention. How do we target interventions? What's the best way for services and funding to be structured to allow this kind of individualized approach that we've been talking about? Nadia, do you want to step in?
Okay. This is Passing on to some of my research, and I think a slide will be popping up now. So one of the things we've been doing when we were working with Living Without Abuse is using this trauma recovery model. It was originally devised to look at young offenders, but we translated that into the context of supporting children from a background of domestic violence and abuse. And one of the recognitions, so this is our adapted model, and we designed interventions in accordance with this model. One of the assumptions is that every child is different, and every child has a different experience, and the impact of that experience is different for every child. So some children show different behaviors or different outcomes to other children. And what we need to recognize is on this trauma recovery, so this is trauma-focused approach, on this trauma recovery model, where is a child situated, and what, therefore, can we do with this child, and how can we best support this child in terms of an individualized approach. And in this particular model here, we can see the different levels of impact of trauma. And right at the bottom, for example, it's probably where more severe trauma is happening. We see a lot of challenging behaviors in the child that the parents don't know how to deal with, or the mother in the case with LWA, when we work with them, we might even see some externalizing or aggressive tendencies that are a response to the trauma. So some of the things we would do there in terms of interventions would be to support the parent to understand the children's difficulty, and to provide that safety that the child needs at this point in time. So this is almost like a hierarchy of needs, different needs that are experienced. So at this stage, a child will not be comfortable in discussing in terms of, not have that cognitive readiness to disclose, for example, or to talk about that traumatic experience, because they have a lot of other challenges in terms of emotional regulation, for example, that they are dealing with. So we designed an intervention that would take this into account, whereby the formulation would look at where are the difficulties of the child, and then look at different modules that kind of will allow the service provider to try and progress the child up that hierarchy towards becoming more and more confident in terms of disclosing and talking about their experiences, let's say, but also in terms of building trust and building attachment and building, all the kind of basic emotions as well, to kind of come to terms with these basic emotions. And the intervention we designed, and this was during the COVID and pandemic when we did this, because they were in urgent need of some online interventions. That was originally an online intervention, but they also used it in person, because the product kind of, the slides we devised could be used in either way. But we had some parent-only modules, for example, that were helping the parent in terms of understanding how to support the child and where the trauma response comes from. We had some joint sessions where child and parent could work on communication, building trust, building attachment, building empathy for each other and understanding for each other. And then we had some child-only sessions. And all these modules that we designed for them, they would be separated by trauma stage, so what's appropriate at which kind of level. And they were also separated in terms of age of child, because one of the difficulties LWA experienced at the time was that they had a huge referral influx of very young people, but they didn't have many activities they could do with the young kids. And with this, I mean below 11 years of age. And so we helped them to design materials that are age and developmentally kind of more appropriate to be delivered. And since then, I know this is a very busy slide, don't worry too much, but since then I had many students at NTU working with me in evaluating that intervention as it's been delivered over the last so many years. And here, for example, you see some of my lovely students who work with me. This is kind of SPUR projects, we call them, whereby they evaluated the effectiveness of the intervention in terms of reducing the difficulties we are seeing, improving mental health difficulties as well. So particularly we saw significant kind of reductions in intrusions, so typical trauma response of intrusions, and avoidance behavior, and improvement in general mental health and well-being. So this kind of more targeted, individualized approach was really beneficial in terms of seeing these significant shifts after their 12-week delivery, for example. So this is, our crux of when we work as a trauma-focused, individualized, targeted approach, recognizing the needs, the risks, and targeting those specifically rather than just a standardized approach.
Amazing, thank you, thank you. Amanda, do you want to come in from Imara's perspective and from your experience?
Yeah, I think, my training background was I trained to work with children specifically, so I have a lot of experience of working with children that are under 11, and so I think, and I guess a lot of the therapists at Imara use art, creative means to communicate with the young people that we see, because we know that sometimes words are difficult to find. And also, particularly when you're working with younger children, you have to get their family on board. It's really important to talk to their parents and carers, and really have conversations with them about kind of what they're experiencing. And in a way, particularly at Imara, we might see parents who have their own trauma that they're having to deal with, and so that might mean that there's an element of blocked care for their children. So yeah, I guess it's important to pull that together as much as you can. And really that, you mentioned attachment, Nadia, and I was just thinking about Beth speaking in panel 2 about the importance of the parent or the foster care or it could be a grandparent, whoever that person is, that loved one, how important that is that child, young person has that support, and that you're trying to offer aspects of repair, particularly when you're thinking about attachment, which is going to be, kind of integral to the work that you're doing when you're working with abuse and sexual abuse, domestic abuse.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to add in that earlier this year, I did a small assessment and consultation around the one-to-one work and the dyadic group work and dyadic art therapy that Imara and other partner organisations do over the city and county. The survivors I spoke to spoke so highly of the interventions, and the outcomes were incredibly positive for both the young people and for the families, family members, and wide-ranging outcomes for them. But the key feedback, I think, was that they're not interchangeable or comparable as offers. All the models met very different needs with different impacts at different times in their recovery. So there was no set pathway through those interventions on offer, but whenever they were accessed, they complemented and built on each other to address very different complex needs. Chris, do you want to come in with how would you target interventions and comment on that question?
So I'm just going to come at this from my own personal perspective. Growing up in 3 domestic violence households, there was no caregiver in my entire childhood who was able to make it a safe space and to get those interventions that children need. So there's a start. We need a safe person in a child's life. I first accessed therapy when I was in my early 20s, after I just had my son, and my mental health started to slide. And I was offered the 6 weeks of therapy where I just cried my eyes out for 6 sessions. The therapist didn't say a word to me. At the time, I thought it was the worst intervention that I could ever have received. However, when I now look back, I saw that it was a safe space which allowed me to cry and release all of that pent-up, suppressed emotion that I was never able to express in any other situation. So, in fact, that was probably the start of my healing journey when I look back at it. And since then, I've had art therapy, I've had hypnotherapy, I've had psychotherapy, and my latest was EMDR after spending 10 years on the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. and going through the criminal justice system for 5 years and not getting justice, I was very angry. So my EMDR allowed me to play out, dramatise what I would do to certain people in my life within a confined way that was safe for everybody.
Thank you, Grace. Esme, do you want to add?
Just coming from a similar perspective as Chris, talking on their family experiences, I was very privileged to have a family network around me. However, they weren't really offered that support at the time. That may have been my decision as well. That may have been my part that I didn't want them involved. But I think as time went on, as I worked with Imara and went through the criminal justice system as well and had a CHISFA, they were able to help build the bridge the gap back with my family and bring them back to kind of being in the know of what my life was now and what it kind of looked like. But touching on kind of different ways I've looked into like more targeted interventions. Obviously I had therapy with Imara, art therapy originally, and then I had a bit of a break away, and then I came back to Imara nearly about a year after, where I reopened my case with the police, where I had what would probably be classed as pre-trial therapy, which I was a part of some research as well in September time with the University of Bedfordshire that was looking into pre-trial therapy and the quality of that. So it is interesting how different standpoints and different life experiences with the criminal justice system and your own family situations do influence your interventions.
Cool, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let's focus on that wider context of support that we've been talking about. John, could you tell us more about working with caregivers? So are we just talking about parents, or is there a need to support other people surrounding?
So again, it really depends on the cultural context, because when we think about kind of the Western way of considering family, quite often that's consanguineal, so based upon blood, or it's marital. And it doesn't recognize other cultures have kind of wider actors in play who often take on kind of familial titles and roles, brothers, uncles, aunties, and these are historically kind of marginalized when we think about the criminal justice system, and even other support services who just see them as random members of the community, not somebody who fulfills that symbolic role of being a caregiver in some capacity and that has that incredible connection to the survivor. And so we need to start thinking about better integrating these community actors kind of into our space and scaffolding them into various forms of support to make sure that we are fulfilling kind of the needs of the survivor within kind of that context. Because, you spoke to justice a little bit earlier, and deep dissatisfaction with the justice system is a consistent theme when we talk about kind of sexual violence and our responses to it. And this is where we need to start thinking about different conceptualizations, not only of family, but also what is this idea of justice? Because you're all going to have a different kind of perception of what is justice based upon your ethnic background, your cultural background, what your family said justice is, what you watch on the TV, things like that. And so what happens when you're kind of forced through this court system that doesn't really represent your ideal of justice? Is that then going to be enough for you? Or do we need to start thinking, okay, where is these other kind of, community and cultural scaffolding points that we can put in so that feels like justice to the survivor? So it doesn't necessarily have to be about kind of this incredibly rather brutalistic system, but okay, how then can we make sure that important actors are there? Maybe it doesn't need a court case, and there's always a lot of hesitancy talking about restorative justice in these type of circumstances, but when we can position the survivor at the center of the process, it can create a better kind of justice outcome overall.
Thank you very much. Esme.
Hello. Just building on previously what we mentioned about family, but also as young people do disclose, they are typically in a school setting as well. So obviously whilst they're going through, whether that is just the criminal justice system or therapy at the time, I know it was touched on in previous panels about how schools coped and dealt with their experiences and gossiping and peers commenting on their experiences. Personally, as other people in the participation group have mentioned, it is very diverse. Personally, as I've had different response from particular designated safeguarding leads to teachers that I had previously good working relationships with, which made it easier to approach them, to talk to them, compared to other teachers that I didn't know, but I had to talk to because they were the person you had to go to, which was quite challenging as well. And in considering of my situation, not to make it all about me, the perpetrator was in the same sixth form as me, so it was very hard to juggle both my needs but also their needs in the context, because they had a duty of care as well to that person. So that was quite a challenge from their caregiver perspective, as we were in their care majority of the week from 9 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday to Friday. So that was where we were majority of our time. And I think, that was quite a hard balance for them, and being able to have good relationships with some teachers but also not others, and being able to navigate that space was quite challenging.
Okay, thank you. Amanda, come back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as a therapist at Imara, I work at the building that we have on Mansfield Road, but more recently I have been working within schools, particularly with children that have experienced domestic abuse. And it's kind of been interesting to then, because you're working with the staff. The school I'm at has a strong safeguarding team, but then, all of the children that I see, it is a primary school, they are with their teachers, the majority. I guess a significant part of their life is spent with their teachers, teaching assistants. I know that I have conversations with those young people, and they will often mention a teacher that they feel closer to or feel that they trust. So I guess I think about that really, the therapeutic hour is an hour. And so you have to think beyond that, and it's really important to be having conversations with the people that those children or young people have relationships with, and kind of talking. I mean, obviously it's confidential in the therapeutic space, but I would often talk to the children that, I will, if you want me to say something specific, I can, but you kind of talk in more general terms, so that then it's the team, like I was saying before, then the team around the child becomes more joined up, I think that's,
Okay, thank you. Chris, do you want to come in with your take on caregivers?
Yeah, and just the support around people surrounding survivors. So again, just to add different depths and insight into this conversation, where the parents and caregivers are abusive, sometimes services can't actually see through what those caregivers are presenting. So in our case, when social services turned up, stepmother would put us in clean clothes and put food on the table. That wasn't the reality. That was just to make sure that the social services were happy with the care that they were giving us. Then when social services took us to the side and said, what is life like? We told them what life was like. They didn't believe us. At school, we said what life was like. They did not believe us. So when you have all of these people not believing you, even though they can see it and they can smell it, literally smell it, because of the neglect, you do shut down. It does silence you. You do not speak up, because why would you? Especially when you get further harm from those caregivers, because you have spoken your truth. Another perspective I wanted to add in here is when we are survivor practitioners, we not only have to look after our own welfare, because when we're looking after survivors, in my case, I have to make sure that I go above and beyond with my own self-care, so that I don't go back to a place that I don't ever want to go back to. So I have to work at it like Patrick was portraying in his play. You have to work on it daily in order to keep yourself healthy and well. And there are a lot of survivor practitioners out there. And I just wanted to bring attention to Emma Harewood, who was on one of the panels earlier. She did 3 projects in 2024 and she created 3 resources. And I was project manager on one of them, and that was the guide to running groups. Then there was also one about supporting survivor practitioners, because as I said, many of us go into our caring roles or our professional roles because we care about people. So that resource is really important for supporting survivor practitioners in the workplace. And then there is a resource about what happened to Elephant and LJ. So how to speak to your children and young people from a point of view of discussing or explaining or responding to what that child and young person's going through. So do look up those resources, and I think I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will have a number of professionals in the room who may be thinking about this as we talk about those wider caregivers. But how equipped are professionals like teachers to support children who've experienced abuse? And what else do they need to be resourced to do this? John, can I come to you first?
So I think a lot of our techniques are unfortunately quite Eurocentric. I mean, they have been designed as best practice within the UK and places such as America, etc. And a lot of the research that's being done on those issues is located at fantastic universities, but they are typically located kind of within the global north. And that means that there's a fundamental gap in knowledge and understanding of what diverse cultural needs are potentially present there. And we can even kind of talk to this idea of language. And so Chomsky talks to linguistic determinism. So essentially the language that you're going to speak is going to impact the way that you view things. You start to kind of, think fundamentally. And so then how do we tie in these support services that aren't designed for different ways of fundamental thinking, and how then can we better kind of encapsulate those into our responses? And I suppose the current challenge is doing that within the very failing budgets of schools at the moment, where they do have so many challenges. And then alongside that, we need to think about the broader social context in which these schools are kind of operating. So I live up just past Mansfield, and unfortunately, my village is a part of the flying flags everywhere to scare away the refugees kind of policy that we see at the moment, that very kind of, xenophobic nationalism. And when we have kind of diverse cultures and refugees going into these environments, are they going to be feeling comfortable in speaking to people in positions of power who they can associate with the state in some capacity? And it's not only kind of teachers there, it's also police officers, and it can be just general community members, because when there's flags everywhere, they might feel completely isolated and in some ways kind of left alone and failed by the support institutions that we actually have in place. So there's a lot of, a lot more that needs to be done to make sure that we have more encompassing services for linguistically diverse people, culturally diverse people, and certainly kind of embedding a focus on supporting kind of refugees within this narrative.
Okay, thank you. So additional barriers and mistrust.
Yes. Yeah.
There for sure. I'm going to add to that from a slightly different perspective. I've recently completed a consultation with LGBTQ survivors, and they definitely shared that immense distrust towards services and a huge lack of safety that they felt. The consequence of that means that they are highly unlikely to access any service, including specialist domestic and sexual abuse services. So if they are unlikely to reach out, we need professionals to be able to recognise them and be confident in asking survivors questions to help them disclose or to access support. They need support to be able to recognise themselves, if that makes sense. The 15 survivors I spoke to, none of them had had a professional that had recognised what they were going through. None of them had shown any curiosity towards their situation, even though they were in school, when they were experiencing familial abuse, when they were in college, when they were in university, when they were accessing health services, all of those natural places where they could have been seen and recognised, they weren't. And they did very strongly feel that that was because their relationships were not cis male violence to cis women's violence, and it was heteronormative. So if they weren't fulfilling that mold, they weren't seen. And survivors very much felt that had someone been able to ask them and explore with them what was happening, they could have changed their situations far earlier. So we need to be able to recognise abuse across the board in all of the different contexts and all of the different relationships it happens in. Nadia, I'm going to come to you to come in on this one with how equipped are professionals?
Yes, I'm looking at the other side in terms of talking about teachers earlier. So we recognize that teachers are, of course, the people who spend a lot of time every day with the children, and they are probably in the best position to recognize and or do something about it when they recognize it. Okay, so with new safeguarding rules coming in about teacher professions and what they should be doing when they recognize any signs of abuse in relation to domestic violence and abuse as well now. We surveyed almost 300 public sector teachers in the UK, well, England and Wales, and we looked at primary and secondary school teachers because we were interested, how confident are they in recognizing signs and reporting those signs? How knowledgeable are they about the reporting procedures, but also what might be barriers to reporting? And we also wanted to know, are there any differences between primary and secondary teachers, for example, given that primary teachers spend a lot more time with a class, whereas in secondary school there's more movement. And these are kind of the main findings from that project that we run. And in terms of the confidence in recognizing sign, and no surprise, the more training, pre or in-service training teachers had, the more confident they felt. But also what I found quite interesting is that the training varied for teachers in terms of training on child abuse and neglect between 1 and 100 hours. So there doesn't seem to be a standardized way or minimum that teachers should be engaging in training, which was the first thing that we picked up on. Less training, less time was spent on domestic violence and abuse training, but that's also because it probably came in more recently, so they were probably still working on the training modules for this. The other things that were interesting, so when we're looking at the different signs of abuse, they vary in content, and we wanted to know whether people feel more or less confident in recognizing some signs over the others. So for example, the signs that we looked at were emotional and behavioral as opposed to problematic parental behaviors and so on and so forth. And teachers didn't differ, right? And the confidence in recognizing those didn't differ, not between primary and secondary, not between the signs of abuse, for example. But the more training they had, the more confident they felt, of course. But overall, they were only on a scale of not at all confident to very strongly confident. They were kind of just above the middle, so fairly confident, but they would not really be strongly confident. So in other words, probably more training would be useful. And then coming to the reporting and barriers, so about 50% of the teachers had previously reported some signs they have observed, but there was also 3 to 4% of suspected abuse that was not reported. So it was very low, however, it was there, right? So some teachers suspected some incidences and did not do anything about it. And when we then asked where the barriers might be, why might that be the case, there was different types of barriers mentioned, from the fear of repercussions in terms of for the child, what would happen to the child if they were reported, but also fear of repercussions towards them, how would the parents react towards them. Distrust in the system was another one mentioned by some. And interestingly, so again, the more training they had, so the confidence in recognizing signs, and that came along with more training, was directly linked to reduced fear of repercussion and reduced distrust in the system. So this is just really highlighting how training increases teachers' confidence in doing something, but it also reduces their barrier from holding back because they're concerned about something that they shouldn't be concerned about. Okay. The other barriers were around emotional barriers, so that was another issue we wish we had asked more question about, but so at the moment it's quite tentative how we can see this, but we think it's the emotional sensitivity and the burden on the teachers as well. So when we are talking about self-care, for example, how do teachers deal with this emotional, having a child, for example, disclose information to them can also be traumatizing to the teachers, right? So are there any mechanisms in place to support the teachers, any kind of supervision or something that might help them in dealing with those emotions, because this is not easy to process. And there's also that notion around feeling overwhelmed with it, and that overwhelm might be partially responsible for the non-reporting in those cases. And then finally, the last barrier was the compliance with the procedure. For those who were confused about the procedure or didn't quite know how to follow the guidelines or found them too difficult, too complex, that might have held them back as well. So it's quite interesting in terms of giving us indicators of where training needs to pick up on in order to support professionals in feeling more confident in doing their job.
That's great, thank you. Super interesting.
Okay.
Esme, you've been involved in some training.
Yes, I think this links very well to what Nadia is saying. At Imara, the participation group, alongside other colleagues, have been developing an education programme to deliver to, I think, predominantly secondary schools. I think that's correct. I don't know if it's gone to primary schools. Regarding looking out for individuals that may have gone through sexual abuse and are wanting to disclose and are showing signs or behaviours that they are going through some sort of a traumatized situation. And we touched on multiple types of grounding techniques to prepare not only the teachers but also to pass along to the individuals if they can disclose. Speaking about the window of tolerance as well, of kind of behaviours that individuals do experience and demonstrate in classrooms, and instead of being labelled as disruptive or naughty, it's their way of expressing how they are feeling inside. And addressing that to teachers so they understand that and they're not being punished, and instead of they should be listened to, alongside just multiple ways that it can transpire for that young person. And I think there is a slide about how many schools it has been delivered to so far. I don't know if that will come up, but it has been quite successful so far. So hopefully the teachers in and around Nottinghamshire should feel a little bit more equipped. And hopefully if Nadia ever goes back to do any more research, post surveys, we'll see a bit of an increase in confidence on that subject.
Amazing, thank you. And then Chris, you're delivering your training experience. Tell us about that.
I just want to pull in some of the conversation that's been going on all day, really, on this point. I think professionals, whoever they are, they need to understand the actual prevalence of child sexual abuse and all abuse. It was pointed out by Viv this morning, and it's on the CSA Centre website. 500,000 new child sexual abuse cases each and every year, 13.1 million survivors. There's many of us. And listening to us because of our lived experience really brings to the fore, really, the impact in all areas of our lives. And professionals, especially teachers, can be the one person that can actually give child hope and a future if they actually understand, if they are trauma-informed and they can actually believe that child and help as much as they can. So it's a really important role to play, but equally, quite a lot of responsibility. So the culture around professionals needs to be trauma-informed and also supportive, because without that support, you're there to teach. It's like police are there to investigate. Teachers are there to teach. However, if you haven't got a safe, well-nurtured, cared for, loved child, it ain't going to learn. It's going to face a lot of injustice and a lot of discrimination throughout its whole life. And I think we need to really bring that home, because even when I used to disassociate in class because, I was hungry, I wanted to know where my next meal was coming from. I used to be shouted at. That just triggered me and made me dissociate even more. So we need to understand exactly what will trigger children. So the culture needs to be right. The policies, the processes, the procedures need to be right. Otherwise, it's not worth the paper it's written on. Just because you've got an anti-bullying policy, don't make it any good if you don't actually implement it and if you're not held accountable for it. So delivering training to professionals to prevent burnout is one of my passions, purely because I had a breakdown at work as a professional. I was a chartered management accountant. I was a manager of 5 staff members. And after I had my son, my mental health started to take a slide, and my stress bucket became so full up, and my body and my brain just could not take it anymore. So I had a psychotic episode at work in front of everybody. And that was shameful and traumatic, and that then made me understand that what I had gone through as a child was impacting me as an adult, and I now needed to do something about it. So it's really important that professionals understand the impact on children and young people, but they also understand, if they're survivor practitioners, that their self-care is 100% needed all of the time. And also, if you are a professional dealing with primary trauma, you could be facing vicarious trauma, and you need to look after yourself, your own health and well-being. And your organisation needs to back you up and support you in whatever they want you to do.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we've covered that that we need professionals to be more equipped, and Chris, you've just been incredibly eloquent about what else we need within that. But what other barriers do we feel there are to holistic support? And I'm going to ask you to be a little bit succinct on this one, if that's possible. Amanda?
Yeah. I think what we see at Imara is, as I've mentioned before, is it's really important that we can try and bring the whole family in. And what we see there is very often the funding that we receive doesn't necessarily reflect that, particularly with experiences of child sexual abuse. I think within the domestic abuse support that we get, there is more of that. There is one-to-one therapy offered. We can do group work with families where parent and child can come, or there might be dyadic therapy that we can offer, which means that the parent and child can be in the session, or the carer can be there in the session. But yeah, in terms of child sexual abuse, we do it at Imara, but we don't always get the funding to offer that support.
Okay, thank you. Louise?
And touching upon Amanda's point of funding, I think we all know we're in a really, really difficult place nationally and locally with funding, and I think we're constantly asking our voluntary sector and our specialist services to do more and more and more, and with that, with limited resources and funding that's really dire, we're in a serious place. And that has an impact not only on the organisation, the staff, but all those young people that are supported. And that doesn't include, touched upon in panel 1, demand, waiting lists, the criminal justice, adjournment, and those young people are going through that support, that process, and that service having to hold these young people for considerable amounts of time. I think when we don't have long-term sustainable funding for our services, it doesn't provide security or resilience to services. It doesn't, you don't feel confident in where the next step is going to happen, what you're going to do, how are you going to grow and improve what you're doing. And I think going forward, it's the pushback, from Nottinghamshire that we need long-term sustainable funding for our brilliant voluntary sector and for our specialist services to continue what they're doing to support young people.
Thank you. Esme, how about you? What other barriers are there to holistic support?
Just to build on from what Amanda and Lou have been saying about kind of feeling the pressure of those waiting times. As the young person, we do feel that as well. But also the referral kind of criteria for therapy, and particularly children under the age of 18 needing to have it reported to the police first, and especially in those adolescence years of teenagers are not feeling comfortable and not really understanding what the police do and what they are, and peer pressures as well of feeling that you don't know if it's the right thing to do, and bringing attention to yourself and other people can put a barrier up. And definitely that is part of kind of societal pressures of kind of what you're meant to do in these hard situations, but also the access support after it. It's kind of if you're feeling ready for therapy, and if you're not ready at the time, it could be the case that that's taken away from you at the time, and then you're not sure of when it's able to come back to. But thankfully, I'm very lucky to have been referred to Imara and their continuing support system, which is incredible. But obviously not everyone, unfortunately, is like that. So it's hard to be therapy ready. And that's definitely a barrier that I know young people do face.
Yeah, Amanda, are we going to come back to you in terms of what should support be like?
Yeah, I think we have our values that are kind of put on our poster there. You could see them on our website. And Imara really, really believe, and all of us that work there believe that survivors should be able to get support when they're ready, that it's provided at a pace that suits them, and to try to be as long as possible. Obviously, that can be hard. We usually have a certain amount of sessions that we are able to give, but we try where possible to kind of allow people, they might get a certain amount of sessions and then they're able to come back when they feel more ready. But I see it, and I've seen it in the 5 years that I've worked there, that as Esme says, sometimes young people aren't quite ready to talk, and you have to kind of, and you'll see that in the kind of non-engagement that you might experience through them or their family, and it's trying to respect that. Sometimes they are just trying to get through as best they can, and what feels important is that the funding that we are seeing, and possibly the referral process that we are seeing more recently, can feel unethical. And I just think we need to be really careful about that we're not excluding people that deserve support just because at that time they don't feel ready for it. And that, there's so many things going on in young people's lives, and that really needs to be taken into account.
Thank you. Grace?
I'm going to be a good girl. Okay. So barriers include finding the right service therapist that will work for the young person. A negative first experience of support can discourage survivors seeking further interventions of support throughout their lifetime if they have a poor outcome in the first intervention. And also, I think that there should be a menu of specialist support available that addresses the needs of the individual at the time that they need it. It should be person-centred and it should be long-term. But we've heard the funding crisis that is going on nationally does actually prevent that. But I think, by the sounds of it, Imara is leading the way in their support offer, and it's just really lovely to hear.
Thank you. So Chris has linked us nicely to kind of beginning to look at what the solutions are to the barriers. What would you like to see change, Nadia?
Well, I'd like to see kind of changes in policy and funding. Obviously, we all talk this funding, that are based on research and empirical evidence, as an academic, of course, showing really the importance of this one-to-one individualized or dyadic approach. We see more and more the kind of move towards group therapy, which in itself can be a good thing, but I think for that individualized, targeted to the specific needs of an individual kind of interventions is really, really crucial. It's really important because it shows much more success rate, effectiveness, and efficacy across various trials. So, we can't underestimate the importance of these one-to-one individualized kind of interventions, and that needs funding.
Thank you. Esme?
Building on from Nadia, and also previous panelists were talking about, Freya mentioned in the language of trauma, people speaking about in the pub that she worked in and jokes that were made, and personally I'd like to see the breakdown of those rape myths and kind of stigmas around and misconceptions around it, to bring the better knowledge to the general public to know what this actually means, and that it's not something you joke about, and it's not something that you should suppress. As Freya mentioned, you internalize that language and what is said around you and what you think and those misconceptions that people have, and I think that should be something that should be done across society, not just in small groups or with your peers. It's something that needs to be a paradigm shift.
I'm going to come back to you, Nadia.
Yeah, I mean, some of the issues I want to highlight is in terms of the research showing over and over again the problem around disclosures. One of the assumptions that people have, or the myths that people have, is that, people will disclose when they have any problems. That's not always the case. We know that. We know that across mental health conditions. We know that across domestic violence. We know that across sexual abuse, and specifically then. This kind of relying on disclosure and a victim's capacity and readiness to disclose is a problem. And this comes back to what I said at the beginning in terms of being more preventative and recognizing early signs without having to rely on that explicit disclosure becomes really important. And just the baseline assumption that everyone is at risk, and henceforth we want to work towards that kind of preventative measures across the board, would be really useful in terms of reducing kind of those barriers, I think.
Thank you. Lou?
I do have it's there. I do have an answer on this piece of paper, but I'm not going to use it actually, because I want to follow on from what Esme was saying about the language, and from panel 2, and Nadia, about prevention. It's so important the way that we talk about sexual violence and abuse, and the victim blaming and myths, the way the media reports, the headlines that we see, the way perpetrators aren't challenged. I want to see that being changed. I want to see the way that we talk about consent. I want it to see it as part of our normal day-to-day conversations in schools, in colleges, in universities, everywhere. So I think, for me, that's what I want to see. I want to see a change in the way that we approach this, and people prioritise that we need to be talking about this subject and around consent.
Thank you.
Sorry about that, to change it last
No,
minute.
that's great. Throw it in. Chris?
I'm also going to change. No, I'm not. Right. So we've got to get comfortable with the uncomfortable and start having this conversation with everyday people, down the pub, down in a food shopping, wherever. I have these conversations all day long, every day. ICSA, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, they put together a package of 20 recommendations, and the government have not implemented one of them, and it's 3 years on. And we spent £186 million. Going back to one of the recommendations, it was the provision of specialist support. I think it's recommendation 14. Don't quote me on that. So with the funding cuts that are going on in the sexual abuse and sexual violence sector, we have seen provision decrease, but demand has increased. And I can't make sense of any of this. When we know that the prevalence has gone up, we know that the complexity has evolved, and we also know that the funding has gone down, I just can't see how we can move forwards without more funding. So if you can write to your MPs, everyone, tell them to implement ICSA recommendations as a package, that would be great.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so we're coming up to the end of our session, so I'm going to ask you all the same thing that we've asked all of our panels, which is, what is your key message that you'd most like people to take away from hearing this discussion? Esme, I've got your name first. Are you ready with a key message?
Yeah, I think so. Mine is very general, and obviously as we're on the holistic panel, I think it's important to take into consideration all the other panels that we've had with the language and the criminal justice system panels that we've had. I think if you're from Imara, from the police, from social services, if you're a teacher, caregiver, whoever you are, use your voice. It always matters, and it will influence change for the good. So please don't ever stop talking. This is why we're here today, to talk, to network, to talk about this topic, and hopefully make change for better.
Amazing, thank you. Chris, you're up next.
I'm just going to read. So, trauma is a normal response to abnormal experience that children and young people go through. Full stop. There is nothing wrong with us as people. Harm has been caused to us, often by loved ones and caregivers, and we need to place the blame back at their feet. For us to heal and live a life, full life, we need to be able to access specialist support, individualised, one-to-one, and group therapy, and whatever other therapy we need, and we deserve it, don't we?
Yes. I should have finished on you, Chris. Amanda.
Thanks, Chris. I was just thinking, that often children that have experienced abuse of any kind, they feel that the blame lays at their door, and that it is important that professionals and services around them can help them try to take that away from them.
Thank you, Nadia.
Okay. I'm coming back to the notion of each child, each case, each experience is different, and the impact it causes is different. And because of that, we need to see each individual human being as an individual rather than just having kind of a standardized approach against or for everyone. So targeted approaches, one-to-one approaches, facilitated by the accurate kind of funding to lower kind of the risks and be preventative and to lower the risk as well is really the important stuff. And this is where the system needs to come in. This is where, together we might be strong to have a voice, but it comes from above, the decision-making to allocate the right funding resources. So it's the policymakers we want to hold accountable as well.
Thank you. Louise?
I'm going to, again, change my answer that's on this piece of paper. I think my final thoughts will be to Imara for today, and to Kath and her team, and to the brave people that have been in the participation group and got up on stage today, because I'm going to get really emotional. I don't know why. But it means a lot. What you do means a lot to everybody and to young people. You've changed lives, and I hope that you will continue your team, and that what you do and the voluntary sector stays strong and brave. And well done to all the young women that came up on stage today.
Thank you. I am going to come to John to add his last key message.
So we might just actually end it there, because I think that's the perfect way to end it. But for my closing thoughts, it's engaging with kind of, different cultures, more diverse cultures. There's often excluded kind of voices that typically aren't represented in our parliamentary kind of system, aren't represented in a lot of the research that we do, and to have that need and support, or for support. And so it's about engaging with them, making sure that we do scaffold it in wherever possible. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have reached the end of our time, and we're 2 minutes over, so I don't think that's too bad. As with all the other panels, there is a QR code for you to submit your key messages as well, and that, I believe, will be collated and added to Imara's online resource bank. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure to sit on a stage with you all, and thank you all for listening and keeping that energy.